Hey, it's Alex from BoardGameCo, and today I want to talk about how do you value a game? How do you put a price on something that is so experiential as these things we collect, that we play, that we acquire? How do you talk about the fact that sometimes we are looking for the best possible deal to save $3 by going to whatever online store and getting free shipping, while also spending hundreds of dollars when the time is right, when there's a Kickstarter that appeals to us, when we see the right situation? We talk about spending thousands of dollars on game tables, on accessories, deluxifying our experiences. How do you put a price on something that is so comprehensive in what it's doing, what's going on here? And the reason I'm doing this video is because recently I put out a video for the top 10 worst value games. That it was a comparative list. It was specifically picking good games that had a bad relative value, at least in my opinion. And it led to a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion, and I'll talk more about that video at the end. If you want, you can just wait till the end, or you can click on the timestamps down below to hop to that, because there is a degree of apology as well as explanation involved in that. Because as much as I think a lot of the things I said were relevant or accurate, I also think that in some degrees I didn't explain my criteria well enough. I didn't explain what I was trying to do with that list, because sure, as much as some people understood it and got it, there were a decent amount of people who fought back on that premise. And I thought it'd be an interesting idea to make a full video about how do you value a board game? What goes into that conversation? Because to begin with, I think the very essential premise of this conversation is that money is a finite commodity. This is a discussion only worth having under the premise that we're all dealing with limited money, and to that end, we all have to put different value conversations or opinions around the board games we buy, around the experiences we acquire. And to that end, I think, and I'm sure I'm missing some, but I think I've narrowed it down into 4 categories of the way we value games, of the way each individual, you, me, someone else, how we put a mental price tag on the experience we are acquiring. Before I go into those 4 categories, I will say that the last category, the 5th magical category, is denial. It's the idea that we don't necessarily want to put thought into the experiences we acquire, because then it might change the actions we take. Meaning, I have no problem spending a ton of money on games. I think that's clear based on all the games you see in this picture. I think that's evident. At the same time, for myself at least, I like to rationally think through what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and that includes the mental allocation of this doesn't make sense, but I want to do it. But when I do that, I acknowledge it. I say, you know what, I think this is a bad price compared to my value system, the way I value games, but I'm going to do so anyway. So I'm not talking about denial. I'm not talking about the aspect where we just spend without thought to how we spend or why we spend, which is, if you want to do that, by all means. Sometimes seeing the price tag, sometimes weighing things up against each other can take the fun out of it, and I understand that. For myself, I've always been that way. I've always been a comparative person by definition, and my video, Top 10 Worst Value Games, was comparative. The entire point of it was comparative value and not absolute value. That's why I picked great games. That's why I picked games that I own half that list. So, with that out of the way, what are the 4 categories? At least in my opinion. So to begin with, we have consumption. Consumption is the idea that a board game is something to be consumed, to be utilized, and I'll explain all of these briefly shortly. The second is experiential, that we don't necessarily think of it as a commodity to be consumed, rather it's an experience that we can acquire, more akin to a vacation or Rolex or whatnot. The third is that it's a commodity, something to be bought, used, acquired, traded, sold, that there's a value on this product, and this product will maintain its value if we properly utilize it. And the fourth I don't believe stands on its own, but does go together with the others, which is relative value. That goes back to the idea of comparative, that the idea that that there is a relative value on board games, that in and of those other categories, you still have to weigh it up against other things. So for example, if you view it as a commodity, you have to value it up against other potential board games that have a commodity value. So let's dive into those a little more clearly. So first of all, consumption. Consumption, I think, is the basic idea of value per play. And you see this a lot, and I saw this a lot in the comments in my last video, of the idea that a board game's value is effectively how many times you've played it, divided by not necessarily how many times, how many hours you've played it, divided by the cost of the product, and divided by the number, I'm doing this wrong, sorry, the hours played times your rating of the game divided by the cost. And rating of the game is inherently subjective in this category. We're not going to use examples of a bad rating that reflects a negative experience, because that would ruin it. Ultimately, if you rate a game a 1, saying that it's a bad game, 100 times 1 is still better than 1 times 10. So we're ignoring bad ratings inherently in this conversation. Rather, we're talking about the positive value of a game. If you rate a game a 7 and you've played it 15 times, is that better or worse than a game you've rated a 10 but only played 8 times and cost this much? So it's the idea that as we play a game, we are consuming to some degree. We are not actually using up, but there is a consumption value at play here. The value of a game to me, to you, to whoever is a consumption-based value person, to that person, a game's value is defined by the consumption you got out of it. How much did you pay for it? How many hours did you play? And what's your rating? What's your subjective experience of the game? And subjective is key here. So that's consumption. The second is experiential, and experiential is, to a certain degree, there's an aspect of denial in this category, although not necessarily. It's just to a certain degree it adds, because of the fact that it's more subjective, it lends itself to more of a denial-based system. And again, I don't mean that negatively at all, but rather experiential is the idea that a game is an experience. A game is a value system. It's a deluxified good. Like similar to, like I said already, a vacation or a Rolex. When you are buying a Rolex, obviously and clearly you are not weighing up the timekeeping value of that Rolex compared to a simpler, cheaper watch. Rather, it's a deluxified good. There's an experiential component to owning a Rolex. When you go on vacation and spend $3,000 on your family vacation compared to any number of other things you can acquire in your life that might make your life better on a more ongoing, permanent basis. I mean, I have a coffee machine, my latte machine that makes the quality espressos and lattes twice a day was a few $100, and I get daily improvement to my life. If you weigh that up against a vacation, it just doesn't hold up. But there's an experiential value to a vacation that you don't get from a daily latte, although I do like my daily latte, don't get me wrong. And so to that degree, the experiential aspect to a board game is the idea that it doesn't necessarily matter how much it costs. It's a deluxified good, it's an experiential product, and it's adding value to my life in different ways, whether or not I play it. And that's important because I talked about in my last video the aspect of playing games, and sometimes playing games is not the only value you get out of board games. Very often the process of acquiring a board game, the process of having it and owning it on your shelf, painting it, assembling miniatures, literally just displaying it, talking about it, being able to pull out 9 boxes full of Zombicide just to display them. This is everything Zombicide Black Plague onwards, that I think is everything at least, all combined. It's all combined into these boxes. And yes, there's an experiential quality to me owning those games. I like it. It's a lot of plastic. I wish I played it more, but I do like it. The third category is the commodity category, and if you've been watching my videos long enough, you know that I very heavily focus on that aspect. And the commodity aspect is the buy and sell element, and it doesn't mean you don't value games in other ways, but rather we recognize, or I recognize, that there is a monetary cost to these games. And especially in the case of myself, who's someone who buys, trades, and sells, who consistently tries to try new games and wants to try new games, and because of the concept that money is finite, I value games from a commodity standpoint to a certain degree. That the game has a value. When you back a game on Kickstarter, when you buy a game, when you trade for a game, this is a product that has a defined value. By the way, thank you for Jesse for adding this to my collection, Jesse from Quackalope. This wasn't in the last video, I used unlock games instead. But a commodity is the idea that there is an actual value assigned to a product, and assuming that product is not sitting on our shelves forever, then there is an actual value at play here. And this is something I actually specifically ignored in my last video. I specifically ignored the monetary aspect of the games I was talking about because I was talking about the games being on your shelf and not the games when you buy, sell, or trade them later. Because the commodity aspect of a game it literally only matters insofar as you might get rid of it later. Now, in my case, I recognize that as a truth. Many games I get, I will eventually get rid of. Many I will keep, many I will love, but many I will sell and move on from. If you are keeping it on your shelf forever, then a commodity has no point because there's no buy or sell trade value to something that's sitting on your shelf. And the fourth aspect is the relative value. And the relative value, I think, like I said already, I think it has to be combined with other values to a degree. The relative value is the idea that within whatever value system we are using, we also care how it stacks up against other things. So for example, as a commodity, just to use the most basic example, as a commodity I can say this is a good buy or not a good buy, this will hold its value or not hold its value, but then I can further drill that down by saying this is a good buy, but this is a better buy. This has a better value. In the experiential category, I can say, yes, I am happy to own all this Zombicide, even though it's not technically worth it, but I just want to own it. At the same time, I'm also looking at these other expensive games that are also not worth it, but I believe they will give me a better experiential value for the money I pay. whichever category you pick, relative is just weighing it up against things in those categories. Now, I believe most people will be a blend of these. You might be 1, 2, or even all 3 or 4, depending on how you value relative. But you might be 1, 2, 3, or 4 of these categories. So, for example, someone might be a consumption and commodity-based person. An example of that would be someone who says, well, the value of a game is not just how many plays I got out of it, but I paid $10. Well, not this one, because you only get 1 play. Food Chain Magnet, and it's going to slide down there. Food Chain Magnet, I paid $80 for it. I played it 4 times for 3 hours a piece, and then I sold it for $60, so I only ended up paying $20, and then divide that by the plays. Meaning it's a combination of the two. You are taking into account the buy and sell value of the product, and then valuing the consumption of the product along the way. That's definitely a valid way. I mean, anything here is valid. Anything I missed out is valid too. These are just my opinions. So a consumption plus commodity model is that idea that you combine the value of the product with the actual consumption you got out of the product. Or maybe you're relative plus experiential. Maybe you really just care about the experience a game gives you, the experience that buying or backing or whatever it is can give you. But yes, you do weigh that up against other options. You're looking at different Kickstarters. You're saying, maybe I can get Aeon's End Trespass, maybe I can get, Oathsworn or whatnot, and I have to pick one of them because I have limited money. So which one will give me a better value, even though I probably won't play either of those enough to justify it? So you could have any combination. And for myself, by the way, I think I'm primarily experiential plus commodity, which is possibly something you would think not, because I talk so much about the value of games, but I do take a very heavy commodity focus on games because of the fact that I recognize so many of them. I want to try everything. I want to experience a little bit of everything. I don't want price tags to stop me from being able to play whatever game I want. And so to a degree, I focus very heavily on the commodity, and you'll see this if you watch my Kickstarter videos. I talk about, well, I want to back this game, but will I be able to sell or trade it later? I don't actually know. And so that commodity aspect to games, it means that I can sit there and buy and get as many games as possible to experience as many of them as I can. At the same time, I'm actually very experiential focused. I don't actually care about the consumption value. If I'm playing a game a lot or a little, it doesn't affect my enjoyment. Rather, the experiential quality of owning a game, of acquiring a game, of being involved in the Kickstarter journey or the buying or the selling or all that, I just like being involved in games, including and especially these videos. These videos that I do are part of that experiential aspect to gaming. And so, in addition to all of this, so I guess that really wraps it up. That really wraps up the whole aspect of the 4 different ways I look at it: consumption, experiential, commodity, and relative. There are different ways to value a game, and I'm curious if you think I left out a category, if you think I left something out. I'm definitely curious. I think these to a certain extent are a good different degree of how you value a game, and everything in this list is subjective. Actually, not necessarily true. Commodity, I don't think, can be subjective. Consumption will be subjective based on your own actual plays, how much you utilize that, and experiential and relative will for sure be subjective categories to a degree. But in addition to all of that, in the last video, time to talk about my top 10 worst value games, one of the things I did is I talked about logging plays and people who marked their games as owned on BoardGameGeek. And while a lot of people understood the metrics I was going for there, I did want to explain exactly what I was doing, because a lot of people also didn't. I got a lot of comments and pushback, like, how can you possibly use BoardGameGeek? Not everyone logs their plays. And the amount of comments I got along those lines means that I didn't do a good enough job explaining what I was going for there. And so I'm going to explain that here, and you can see, again, timestamps below if you want to skip all that, but the basic idea is I was using comparative data, I was using relative data analysis, and it is effectively polling data, meaning it is skewed, or it is not 100% accurate. It is taking a sample size of data and then trying to extrapolate from there, and inherently that is not accurate. Now, I will note also I used number of plays instead of hours played just because it was easier to get that data. I completely recognize that hours played would be a better metric. Now, but what I was doing is I was picking different games that I felt were all expensive, premium games that are hard to get to the table. I specifically picked Gloomhaven, Seventh Continent, Too Many Bones. I picked games, Mage Knight, games that I thought were hard to get to the table, because comparing Kingdom Death Monster up against Catan would have been a bit of a waste of an exercise. They're not even in the same category. And because I'm using polling data, comparative data, I wanted it to be as comparative as possible. And what I was doing within those is, once I picked those 6 games, I believe it was, I then compared them all to each other. I then compared them to each other to see what number of plays versus owned there are. Is it inaccurate? Of course it's inaccurate. Who knows who logged their plays in terms of who logs the games that they owned, who logs which plays. Maybe one person came in and logged 100 plays of Gloomhaven to catch up for the past year and a half. You could have any number of inaccuracies in that data, but what I was doing is I was going for the aspect of polling data, that's comparative data that can be used to weigh up against each other. Also, and this is an important one, also my videos are meant to be fun. It's not meant to be an absolute inherent statement that this game is worse than the other. They are inherently my opinion, and yes, I use data to back up to my opinion to a degree, but if I'm wrong, and I'm okay with that. This is not a very heavy conversation. To me, everything I do in board games is about fun, and that very much includes these videos. That being said, I do recognize that I didn't necessarily weigh up, or I didn't necessarily express my love for those games as much as I think I could have. I own half the games on this list for a reason. I own them and love them and want them. I mean, all the stuff I have here, in addition to the fact that, yes, Cthulhu Wars I haven't played yet, but I own it for a reason and I'm looking forward to it. Food Chain Magnet is expensive, but oh my gosh, that game is good. Quackalope that game's not going anywhere. I'm keeping that board for who knows how long. And that's another aspect. People talked about the heirloom quality of board games, it's true. Quackalope will be something that could theoretically be passed down, assuming my kids don't break it first. So I do value those games. And Kingdom Death Monster. Kingdom Death Monster in particular I want to apologize for, because I'll admit I had a little fun at Kingdom Death Monster's expense. And while I believe what I was saying, I do believe Kingdom Death Monster is a terrible buy for someone getting into board games for the first time. Make sure, although I believe Quackalope was actually his entry point to board games, but I believe it's an expensive way to jump into games. It's an expensive way to walk into this hobby, and I think you can get a lot of different experiences for a lot cheaper that you will value a lot. So in general, expensive games are something that you want to be sure you want. Whatever your value system is, whether it's consumption, experiential, commodity, relative, whatever your system is, you want to ensure that you're getting these games in a way that lines up with your system, that you are okay with. I buy expensive games that are a relatively bad value because of the experiential quality that I value. And maybe you will as well. Maybe someone buying Kingdom Death Monster as their first game will value that, and that's great. That's incredible. That being said, I did want to offer up, if you've been wondering what this little horse head is doing here, it's because there's only so many ways I can wave a white flag. And this over here is my white flag. I'm apologizing to any Kingdom Death Monster player I offended, or anyone I offended for that matter. But more importantly, if you've been watching my videos long enough, you know that I have this little miniature feud with Quackalope, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to wave the white flag, as it were, because it takes too much energy to keep up with that guy, and offer that the next time I go into Quackalope, the next time I visit Jesse, because of how much he loves Kingdom Death Monster, and it is his favorite game, I am offering to play that game with Jesse, have a little filming thing, and give my opinion. Maybe I've been wrong. Maybe I've been pushing off Kingdom Death Monster for the wrong reasons. I'm not actually pulled in by the gritty fantasy world, but maybe it's an excellent game, something that I should not be dismissing lightly, and something that I should be experiencing, and maybe perhaps I will love that game. And maybe I'll stop taking small pot shots out of it because I find it funny, which I apologize for. So this is my white flag to Jesse, an apology to all Kingdom Death Monster players I've offended. I am offering to play Kingdom Death Monster with Quackalope to temporarily, keyword there, to temporarily end our little miniature feud going on. And I will note, now's a good time to note as well that if you're not paying attention, if you haven't been paying attention to what's going on with Quackalope and I, he has this giveaway going. My giveaways are mostly over at this point. I still have some going. He has a giveaway that is basically offering to give away a copy of Kingdom Death Monster, but he does have to hit 16,500 subscribers by September 6th. He's currently at 15,500, possibly a little more depending on when you watch this video, but he's currently at 15,500. He has roughly 10 days to get us 1,000 subscribers, roughly. I don't know how precise he's going to be with that timeline, but it's doable. He's been gaining roughly 100 subscribers a day for the past few days or whatnot, so it's definitely doable. It's definitely possible for him to hit that number. If you want a chance to win Kingdom Death Monster, a $400 game, just for free, by quacking on one of my videos, well, I'll include links to the relevant videos down below, but now's your opportunity, and your subscription might actually be the difference. Again, 100 subscribers a day with 10 days left. That's a tight line to hit. So we'll see how that plays out. That's basically it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it interesting. I hope I in some way managed to clarify my thoughts, clarify how I value a game and what goes into my own personal definition of value, as well as the fact that I recognize other value systems do exist. There are any number of ways to value a game, and ultimately, the most important one is, are you having fun in this hobby? Is everything you're doing fun for you? Because as long as it is, you're probably doing something right. I am Alex Radcliffe from BoardGameCo. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe down below, give it a like, or most importantly, I am very curious, what value systems do you think I left out? What other lenses are there to look at board games, to look at this hobby, that I didn't think about when putting these show notes together? I'm very interested in your opinion, and I'd love to see it in the comments down below. Until next time, I am Alex Radcliffe from BoardGameCo, and I hope you're having fun.